Welcome to Learn TV. The SLASSCOM Innovation Summit was held on the 14th of June at Cinnamon Grand. With us today, we have Professor Soumitra Dutta, who was the keynote speaker at the event. He's a former dean of the Samuel Curtis Johnson College of Business at Cornell University. He is also a co-editor of the Global Innovation Technology Report, published by the World Economic Forum, and the founder of the Global Innovation Index, published by the World Intellectual Property Organization. So, is this your first time in Sri Lanka?
Yes, this is my first time, and I'm very pleased and happy to be here in this wonderful country.
What do you tell me about yourself?
So I was born in India, and like many Indian students who graduated from the technical institution in India, I went to America as a graduate student to study in Berkeley. One interesting fact is that I did both my PhD in computer science but also master's in business administration out there. And then I spent my career really as a professor in a business school, mainly in Europe at a school called INSEAD in France, and also then for the last 7-8 years in Cornell University, New York City. And a lot of my work really spans the boundaries of both corporations and governments. So I did a lot of work in technology and innovation policies for both governments and also at the company level.
How did you come to this position?
Well, you know, careers evolve in always interesting ways, and I started out very much as a very pure computer scientist, pure engineering background. And what happens is, because I did a MBA in business, and that allowed me to go and get into a business school academic career, and being in a business school really forced me to come in contact with a lot of the business issues that companies face in technology. And somehow the last 20-25 years have been years where the progress of technology has been tremendous, and technology has become much more ubiquitous in companies and in countries. And so really, in some sense, I was lucky with the timing that I had the skills, I was in the right context, and I could actually apply my knowledge in technology and apply it in the right context of business and corporations and countries. So, you know, it's part luck, part capabilities, and part willingness to explore and invest in new areas.
It's a very inspiring story. Okay, Professor, what is the Global Innovation Index, and what were you trying to achieve with that?
So, you know, what happened was that I was doing a lot of work with technology, and for a long time I was observing how a lot of young people, especially in emerging markets, whether Latin America or Asia or elsewhere, were creating interesting innovations with technology, be it mobile apps, other kinds of interesting innovations. And at the same time, if you actually looked at the rankings or the measures of innovation in these countries, most of the measures were not capturing that element of innovation that was happening in these economies, because most traditional measures of innovation were focused on traditional aspects like PhDs, the number of researchers, the number of patents, the number of publications. Now, these measures are still very relevant, but somehow they don't capture the full diversity of innovation happening in many economies, where you don't need a PhD for innovating, where innovation sometimes happens in the countryside without really formal research labs, without necessarily venture capital. Microfinance, for example, can be a way of stimulating innovation in many economies. And I felt there's a need to have a more complete and a more holistic measure of innovation. So that led me to creating the Global Innovation Index framework, and that was done in 2006-07 time frame. And I'm very pleased that over the last 10 years or so, it has really evolved into a global standard right now that is accepted by the United Nations, used by many governments, including in Sri Lanka, to really help understand how to drive innovation inside economies and help the country improve more effectively.
Okay. So what are the key indicators and areas of focus when measuring a country's innovation index score?
So, you know, we have a rather simple model of innovation just to help people understand the key ingredients. So what we believe are, there are things that a country needs to do to help stimulate innovation, and the actual outputs of innovation, the result, if the inputs have been done correctly. So we have 5 pillars of the input conditions, which typically cover aspects like the political regulatory environment, which is very important. You don't have the right environment, you can't actually have innovation. covers aspects like the infrastructure, both the physical infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, very important for innovation. Covers aspects like the market support that you have, the market systems, how mature are the markets, how mature the financial markets, how easy is it to obtain financing, the business sophistication, how capable is business for innovating, and also other elements of the knowledge infrastructure in the economy. And then we measure elements on the output side, which are more linked to the knowledge outputs, the more traditional technology and patenting output. And we also interestingly measure aspects of the creative services sector. So we do consider in our model that movies and film and other kinds of more creative services sector are also examples of innovation. So we try and take the input conditions and the output conditions and combine them in the model of the Global Innovation Index.
Okay, what are the key findings of the Global Innovation Index?
You know, we've done this index now for 10 years, and it's very interesting that you start seeing some trends in the way some countries are outperforming their peers. We call them innovation achievers. You see some trends in which some countries are actually moving up faster, moving rapidly up a certain path of innovation. You see some countries that are always high up in the innovation index ranking. So you see a lot of interesting statistics and trends, which I think very relevant for us today. So, for example, what you see is that the top 10 countries, usually every year, is a mix of countries in America, Europe, and Asia, which by itself is interesting. It tells you that, look, the leaders in innovation, not just only in Europe and America, so you have leaders emerging in Asia too. For example, Singapore and Korea typically come in the top group of countries internationally. You also see, for example, that the high-income countries typically tend to do more well on the innovation index ranking. And there's an interesting question out here in terms of how this cycle operates. So if you have high-income economies already, they probably have more better input conditions to innovate. They're successful innovate, and that leads to more wealth in the economy, it leads to better conditions for innovation further on. And the gap between the successful high-income innovative economies and the rest is actually quite significant. So we don't see that gap decreasing in general, except for a few rapid movers. So for example, China is one country that has been moving quite rapidly in the last few years in the innovation rankings. And we see that China, as a result of national strategy, national focus, has been moving steadily up the innovation rankings. So you see interesting trends. You also see some trends in Africa which are very relevant, in the sense that you see some African economies like Rwanda and other countries who are in fact investing in innovation now quite significantly and moving up the innovation curve. And you see this kind of initial signs of growth and investment innovation happening even in Africa.
That's interesting. So Sri Lanka is currently ranked 19th on the Innovation Index with a score of 29.85. Could you put that in context for us relative to the rest of the world, and perhaps tell us what we can learn from this?
So, you know, we typically rank around 128, 130 countries in the world. So being ranked in the 90s is not necessarily the best place to be in. Clearly, it shows a lot of room for improvement out there. What is very important to keep in mind is that the ranking is a relative ranking. Okay, it's not an absolute ranking. What I mean by that is that if you look at the score of Sri Lanka over time, I'm sure it's increasing. So every country in most cases improving, but the question is how much faster are other peer countries improving? And I think what the message really out here is that if others are improving at a faster rate, you're still falling behind. And I think what Sri Lanka needs to do really is invest much more in innovation, invest much more in innovation strategy inside the country to help drive the entire economy a more innovative path forward.
Right. So how can Sri Lanka further improve the ranking on the index? And what are your recommendations?
So, you know, Sri Lanka, has entered into a phase of more stable growth, which is, I think, very important. As I mentioned earlier, one of the input conditions was the political, regulatory stability, the macroeconomic stability in the economy. And without the stability, it's very hard to actually drive innovation in any economy. And that's one reason why you see many economies in Africa or elsewhere suffering. So I think Sri Lanka has entered a good phase of growth. The human talent is here. And I think clearly Sri Lanka should be learning from other smaller economies. The other smaller economies that have done extremely well. For example, you have economies in Europe like Finland and Scandinavia, economies in Asia like Singapore and Korea. And these economies have shown the path how smaller economies can also improve rapidly. In fact, smaller economies, I argue, have some kind of an advantage compared to bigger economies because they can actually make change happen more easily and more uniformly across the country. It's much harder for a large economy like India and China to make change happen on a large scale. It's possible, but it's much harder. So I think in one level, you can learn from other economies, and clearly what you see out there is that there needs to be some kind of a national strategy, a national focus on innovation. Almost all examples where countries have moved successful innovation have involved some kind of a national consensus that this is important. Second, you need investment in human infrastructure. Human capital is very important. You need an investment in universities. You need to link universities to industry. The linkage is very critical. The more stronger the links, the higher the chance that you're able to create more innovative clusters, more innovative economies and innovative companies in the country. And fundamentally, you have to keep on pushing an aggressive, fast pace because the world is moving, and believe me, I visit many countries, and I visit actually and talk to government leaders in many countries. Almost every single country today in the world realizes that the path to further wealth and prosperity is through innovation. And that is being enabled to a large degree by the progress in technology. You see, there's a fundamental driver of change that is happening in technology around us. As technology progresses, opening up new paths for wealth creation. And some countries are going to take advantage of it more than others.
Right. So recently we launched Island of Ingenuity, a tech country brand. So do you think it will help us improve our ranking?
See, I think improving the branding of a country is very important. And I think, India is a good example of a country that did not really have a very good brand in technology innovation 30 years ago, but successfully over time it has built that brand. So I think building the brand is important both internally and externally. You need to actually give some kind of positioning of people inside the country and also people outside the country. So I think using brands and labels are very important, but that has to be followed up by action. So if you don't actually have the right actions, then investing in people, investing in the digital infrastructure, investing in companies, that brand promise will not be realized. To actually make the brand promise a reality, you have to follow it up by actions. And a good case is, Singapore. Singapore has used all kinds of branding, like the intelligent island and so on. And each time there has been clear national plans, there has been clear investments in national industry, clear focus on attracting talent. So I think, as long as this branding is accompanied with the right kind of actions, the results will show over time.
Right. The tech industry in Sri Lanka is one that relies heavily upon international relations and operates at a global level. Can you expand on technology and what makes it in particular so international?
So technology inherently is a global industry. Okay, so it doesn't matter whether Sri Lanka or Singapore, and tech talent is a global talent. So any good tech talent in Sri Lanka can equally well work in Singapore or Dubai or in the US or elsewhere. So the demand for tech talent, the demand for tech services, the demand for technology products is global. So inherently, I think you have to work in a global industry, global context, and that's one reason why the international aspect of technology will continue to increase and be more stronger in the years ahead.
So there are youngsters who will be inspired by your speech. Any points you can give them as takeaways?
Well, I think the most important thing that I would tell youngsters today is you have to believe in yourself and believe in your country. There are plenty of opportunities in Sri Lanka or whichever country young people are growing up in, and really you need to have the right educational skills to benefit from those opportunities. So invest in yourself in education, that's the first step. The second step is, of course, try to work and learn. Work either in a company or in a startup that you own, sort of created. But learning is a very important part of that. You have to keep on learning and investing. And at the same time, you have to be open in your perspective and be global. Don't have too many biases about the world. You'll have to work with different people, different cultures. the more you actually work in teams of global, different cultures, global contexts, the more successful you'll be in your careers. And I think this is a great time to be young, because the next 20, 30 years are going to be incredibly full of opportunities. And so I think I would just tell, believe in yourself and make the most of this great gift that you have.
Okay, all right. So thank you, Professor, for being with us today.
Thank you very much.